Lena woke before the sun, like she always did. The small room was quiet except for the soft sound of a wall clock. She made tea, tied her hair, and put on her neat work shirt. Outside, the street lights were still on, and the sky had a thin gray color, not night, not day. She walked to the office building 2 blocks away. She knew the route by heart: the bakery on the corner, the old bookstore with faded posters, the bus stop with the broken bench. She liked the silence of morning. It felt gentle, like a deep breath. At the office, she cleaned floors, dusted desks, and wiped glass doors until they shone. She liked seeing a clean line on a dusty surface. It made her feel calm. Sometimes she hummed small tunes while she worked, soft, careful notes that only she could hear. She did not know the names of the songs. She carried them inside her from long ago, from evenings with her father when he would tap a rhythm on the table and tell her to listen, then answer. He did not use big words. He would simply say, "Let the music talk to you," and you answer slowly, like a friend. When she finished the morning shift, she walked to the bakery where she worked from noon. Warm smells greeted her: butter, sugar, cinnamon, and fresh bread. She smiled as she tied her apron. The baker, a kind woman named Rosa, promised her the end pieces of the fruit cake that did not make it into the display. Lena never asked for anything. She always said thank you, and she meant it. She wrote neat labels for the glass case. She stacked cookies in careful rows so each one had space to be seen. People liked her soft voice and the way she remembered their favorite pastries. All day, there was music in her head. It did not interrupt her work. It simply walked beside her, steady and kind. She would tap a rhythm with her thumb against the edge of the counter, not too loud, not too long. In the afternoon, when the bakery grew quiet, she sometimes watched the civic hall across the street. Tall glass doors, a shining lobby, posters of famous names: violinists, pianists, singers, and a large new poster with bold letters: "Open rehearsal with world-renowned Maestro, one night only." The poster looked expensive. The letters looked sure of themselves. She read the smaller lines twice: "Public welcome. Free seating. First come, first served." Lena thought about that poster while wiping the counter. An open rehearsal meant anyone could enter. She had never been inside the hall. She had walked past it many times, seen elegant people in dark clothes and shiny shoes, heard laughter and the soft hum of a crowd. She had waved at the ushers through the glass once, but she had never crossed the door. The thought made her nervous and excited at the same time. She did not own fancy clothes. She had a simple black sweater and clean flats. "Public welcome," she repeated in her mind. The words felt like a small invitation placed in her hand. After her shift, she wrapped a piece of bread in a napkin and tucked it into her bag for later. The air outside carried a light drizzle. She hesitated at the corner, looking across the street. People were already going inside the civic hall. An usher held the door and smiled at a couple. A young boy in a jacket tugged his mother's sleeve and pointed at the poster. Lena smoothed her sweater. She could go in. She was part of the public. The door would open for her too. She waited for the light to change and crossed with small, careful steps, holding her bag against the drizzle. Inside, the lobby smelled like new carpet and polished wood. She stood to the side and took in the tall ceiling, the warm lights, the slow flow of people who seemed to know exactly where to go. She saw a stack of programs on a table and stepped forward. An usher was trying to hold them while scanning tickets, and a corner of the stack slid toward the floor. Instinctively, Lena reached out and caught the falling papers. "Oh, thank you," the usher said, a little out of breath. "Could you help me place these on that stand?" Lena nodded and arranged the programs in a neat fan. She did not want to be in the way. After a moment, the usher smiled again and pointed her toward the open doors. "You can go in. Sit wherever you like." The hall itself was wide and soft with velvet seats. The stage was bright, but the lights were not harsh. Musicians were already up there, tuning and warming up. A cello drew a long, honeyed note. A flute sent a small silver line of sound into the air. There was a piano at the side of the stage, not the main concert grand at the center, but a second one for rehearsal. Its lid was half open, like a mouth about to speak. Lena sat near the aisle. She folded the program on her lap and let her shoulders relax. The music of people's voices, footsteps, the gentle tap of a stand light had a rhythm of its own. On the stage, the maestro arrived. He was taller than she expected and wore a simple black jacket. He raised his hands, and the room grew quiet without him saying a word. The orchestra played a gentle passage. The strings worked together like a single heart. The maestro stopped them, adjusted a tempo with a small motion, and started again. He was precise, even a little strict, but the players seemed to like it, some smiled with their eyes, and the music grew clearer. Lena watched how he brought the softest sounds forward and let the louder parts step back. She liked that. It felt like walking in a garden where every flower had its turn to be seen. During a short break, people stood and stretched. The ushers collected a few fallen programs near the front. An usher near the side looked overwhelmed with bags and a dropped water bottle, so Lena rose to help. She picked up the bottle and set it on the edge of the stage. The side piano was right there, close enough to touch. It drew her like a quiet friend. She did not plan to play. She only wanted to feel the smoothness of a key under her finger, to say hello. She placed a single finger on middle C and pressed very softly. The note was almost shy. Then she pressed the E, then the G, and let the three notes rest together in a small, warm sound. She had barely lifted her finger when the maestro turned. His voice was not loud, but it carried. "Please," he said, "this is not a place for random noise." He did not look angry, only busy, as if he had many things to fix and very little time. But his words found their way to her heart and settled there in a heavy way. Lena took her hand back and stepped away from the piano. "Sorry," she whispered, though she was not sure anyone heard her. The ushers looked at her, kind but careful, like people who did not want trouble. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had only touched 3 notes, barely a breath of sound. She sat down again and tried to focus on the rehearsal. The music was still beautiful, but it felt far away now. She held the program too tight without meaning to. The page bent under her fingers, and she smoothed it, again and again. She told herself it was fine. She was only a guest here. Important people were working. Her place was in the seat, to listen and not disturb. Still, the small moment played again in her mind, the brief kindness of the hug of 3 notes, and then the quick push away. She thought of her father's words, "Let the music talk to you," and wondered if she had done something wrong by answering. When the rehearsal started again, a stagehand passed near her row. He had a pencil behind his ear and a roll of tape hooked on his belt. He paused and said softly, "Hey, don't worry. You didn't do anything bad. It's just a busy day." His voice was practical and kind. "You like the piano?" he asked. Lena nodded. "You play?" She hesitated, then nodded again. "Sometimes," she said. "At the church. The piano is old." The stagehand smiled. "Old pianos have stories," he said. "Keep playing." He gave a small, encouraging nod and moved on, because his job needed him. His words stayed with her like a small lantern in the dark. The music rose and fell in the next piece, and Lena let it wash over her. She watched the pianist at the main concert grand shape a line with a tender hand. She noticed how the pianist watched the maestro's left hand for a clue, then the right hand for expression. She saw how the orchestra listened back and made space. It was a conversation, not a contest. That idea felt beautiful to her. No one fighting, no one pushing too hard, just careful listening and honest sound. She thought about the 3 notes she had touched earlier and how even that tiny shape could be part of something larger if it was met with care. When the rehearsal ended, people stood and clapped politely. The musicians packed their instruments. The maestro spoke with the concert master and the pianist, hands moving in small shapes as he talked. Lena stayed in her seat a moment longer to avoid the rush. She wanted the room to empty so she could take one last look at the stage without anyone noticing her. She folded her program and stood. The hall was clearing. She took 2 steps down the aisle and then stopped, her eyes drawn back to the side piano. She thought of her morning chores, her afternoon work, the quiet church evenings, and the 3 tiny notes that had tried to greet this grand room and failed. On her way out, she reached the door and then turned back. She did not know why. Something in her chest asked for a promise. She looked at the stage, at the piano, at the lights cooling themselves into normalness. She was a simple woman with 2 jobs and little time. She did not have a famous name. She did not have formal training. But she had ears that listened, hands that tried, and a heart that did not like to push others aside. In that doorway, with the usher thanking the last few people, Lena made a quiet decision. It had no big sound. It had no big audience. It was as soft as a breath. She decided she would find a way to play on that stage, even if only once. She would not demand anything. She would not argue or make a scene. She would practice. She would prepare. She would wait for a small opening and be ready when it came. She would bring the same care she used to line up cookies, to wipe glass until it shone, to catch a falling stack of programs. She would bring kindness into sound. She did not know how it would happen. She did not know when. But she knew why. Because music had spoken to her for years, and it was time to answer in a room that could hold the answer. Outside, the drizzle had stopped. The street smelled like rain and warm pavement. She walked past the bakery window where her reflection looked back at her with tired eyes and a steady mouth. She touched the strap of her bag and felt the small weight of the wrapped bread inside, a gift for later. The poster on the Civic Hall door caught the light and shone in the corner of her eye. She did not look at it again. She did not need to. The words she cared about were already in her heart. Public welcome, yes. But also, keep going, keep listening, keep answering. She walked home with a straight back and soft steps, the shape of 3 quarterly cleaning shift, stacked her cloths neatly, and tucked her spray bottles away. Instead of going straight to the bakery, she crossed the street to the Civic Hall. The doors were not open to the public yet, but the lobby lights were on. A man in a dark sweater stood at the front desk, checking a sheet clipped to a board. He had a neat beard and a careful way of speaking, like each word had a place. Lena waited until he finished a phone call and then stepped forward. "Good morning," she said softly. "Sir, I wanted to ask a small question." He looked up and gave a polite smile. "How can I help you?" "I love the piano," she said. Her hands were calm at her sides, but she could feel her heart beat a little faster. "I was wondering if there is any way to audition here." "Not for the main concert," she added quickly, as if to protect both of them from a big idea, "but maybe for a community thing. A small chance to play." The man's smile stayed polite, but his eyes moved to the board again, then back to her. "Our programs are planned months ahead," he said. "Right now, everything for this week is full." He paused, not unkind. "Sometimes, we have open community previews. It depends. Try the bulletin board in the side hall. We post notices there." "Thank you," she said, meaning it. She did not take his answer as a no, only as a sign to try elsewhere. She walked to the side hallway where a corkboard stood with neat rows of flyers and thin pushpins. There were lessons for children, a call for volunteers, a posted schedule for the youth orchestra, and a fresh paper notice that said, "Community preview tomorrow at 5 p.m. all welcome." Her eyes traced the smaller lines and found a note at the bottom, "Student pianist for the chamber piece, TBA." She did not know what TBA meant, so she took a photo on her phone to read later. At the bakery, the day was busy. A school group came through, and the children pointed at the bright cookies shaped like stars. Lena filled boxes, tied ribbons, and smiled at the teacher who tried to keep everyone in a line. Her hands moved with habit and care, but her thoughts returned to the corkboard note. She asked Rosa during a quiet minute, "Do you know what TBA means?" Rosa wiped a counter, thought for a second, and said, "To be announced." Lena nodded. The word announced felt big, but to be felt hopeful, like a door not yet opened. That evening, Lena went to the church. The building was cool inside, and the air smelled like old wood and candles. The piano sat near the front, its surface marked by many small scratches from years of hands and hymnals. She opened the lid and tested the middle keys. The A was a little flat. One of the black keys had a tiny chip. It did not bother her. Old pianos had soft stories in them. She set her phone on the music stand and opened the voice recorder. It would not make her a better player, but it would help her hear what needed care. She started with slow scales, not to show speed but to teach her fingers to land gently. She counted out loud, not afraid of sounding simple. 1, 2, 3, 4, she said, matching each number to a steady beat. She played a short hymn she knew by heart and tried to add a small line of feeling at the end of each phrase, like a bow that tied the sentence. She did not rush. She kept the metronome in her mind by tapping her foot very lightly. The choir director, Mrs. Sabina, arrived carrying a stack of music folders. She was a tall woman with a bright scarf that brought color to the gray evening. She walked with purpose but with kindness in her eyes. She heard the last part of Lena's hymn and stopped a few pews back. "That was very gentle," she said. "You let the notes breathe." Lena stood quickly, feeling shy. "I'm sorry," she said. "I hope I'm not in the way." "You are not in the way," said Mrs. Sabina. She placed the folders on the pew and came closer. "I have heard you practicing before. You listen before you play. That is good. Many people play before they listen." Lena smiled, small and grateful. "I want to learn more," she said. "I can play by ear. But reading music is hard for me." "Then we will make it a little easier," said Mrs. Sabina. She opened one of the folders and took out a simple arrangement of a piece for piano and small ensemble. "This is written for students," she said. "But it has a clear melody and places where the piano and strings speak to each other." She pointed to the notes. "Don't be shy to mark the page. Use a pencil, write finger numbers, draw small arrows where you will breathe. Music is for people, not for paper." They sat together at the piano bench. For a while, the church was quiet except for their voices and the slow, patient sound of notes finding their places. Lena wrote small numbers above certain notes, 1 for the thumb, 2 for the index finger, all the way to 5 for the little finger. She drew a light circle around the measure where the strings would enter. She put a tiny star where she needed to watch and not jump ahead. When she played the first line again, she kept the tempo soft and the hands relaxed. The tune did not grow bigger just because she wanted it to. It grew because she gave it time. "Good," said Mrs. Sabina. "Now, imagine someone speaking to you, and you answer. That is the conversation. Do not shout your answer. Do not rush to give it. Let it arrive." They worked like that for almost an hour. When the choir members began to arrive, Lena closed the folder and handed it back. "Please keep it," said Mrs. Sabina. "Practice slowly. Record yourself, then listen on the bus. Humming is practice too." She took a small, square metronome from her bag and set it on the piano. Borrow this. One click is one step. Walk with it. Lena thanked her again and wrapped the metronome in a scarf to carry home. On the bus, she listened to the short recording she had made and hummed the melody softly. The bus lights made small islands of brightness in the dark. People looked tired but calm. Lena watched the stops go by and traced the shape of the piece in her mind. Start. Answer. Quiet place. Rise. Soft landing. She did not try to dream about a perfect future. She only asked herself to be ready for a small opening. The next day, the bakery felt heavier on her arms. A tray slipped a little when she lifted it from the oven, and the heat brushed her wrist. She did not drop it. She moved slower and checked every step twice. At lunch, she sat on the back step and ate a small sandwich and 2 slices from the end of a fruitcake. She used part of the break to mark more finger numbers on the music and to write a tiny reminder to herself, do not chase. Invite. She underlined it once. At 4 in the afternoon, she crossed to the civic hall. The lobby was busier than usual. There was a cardboard sign set on an easel, Community Preview 5 p.m. Families walked in with children who wore shoes that clicked a little on the floor. The youth orchestra players stood in small groups, warming up with bits of scales or laughing quietly. A slim boy held a violin under his chin and checked his tuning. A girl with a cello leaned her ear close to the instrument and drew a careful line with the bow. The feeling in the air was bright, like a room where a window had just been opened. At the stage door, a coordinator checked names off a list. He had a practical face and a badge that said Program Assistant. Lena waited until there was a small pause and then stepped forward. Hello, she said. I wanted to ask, do you still need a pianist for the chamber piece? The coordinator looked at her shoes, then at her face, and then at his list again. Our student pianist is at home sick, he said. We're trying to decide whether to skip the piece. He studied her a moment. Are you with a school? No, said Lena. I practice at the church. I can read this piece a little. She held up the marked pages, her pencil lines neat and careful. The coordinator's mouth made a small uncertain line. He did not seem rude, only responsible. It's close to start time, he said. We can't have surprises. A young concertmaster, a teenager with steady eyes and tidy hair, came up beside him and read the air kindly. We can try a short run, the concertmaster said. Just a minute or two, after strings warm up. He turned to Lena. Would you be okay with that? Yes, she said, feeling the word as calm as she could. Her hands felt cool. She put the music on the side piano and took a breath. The metronome ticked in her mind, 1, 2, 3, 4. She rubbed her thumb lightly across her index finger, a small trick to remind her to stay loose. The orchestra tuned. The concertmaster raised the bow. The sound of the strings found the same tone, like many voices saying the same soft word. All right, said the coordinator. Just the middle section. He kept his voice level, but he glanced at the clock. Lena placed her fingers gently on the keys. The first notes came out clean but quiet. She counted, listened for the entry of the violins, and tried to leave space. Then the strings entered, and the room changed shape. She felt the music lift around her like a soft curtain moving in a breeze. For a few measures, she kept the tempo, held her breath at the phrase end, and allowed the sound to rest. Then, as the line grew busier, her eyes chased ahead. The numbers she had written on the page blurred a little. She felt her left hand reach for a harmony before the measure arrived. The concertmaster's bow moved with steady time, but Lena's fingers hurried. She knew it the moment it happened, she rushed a bar. The strings stayed true, she reached the corner too fast and then waited, suddenly unsure. Her face warmed. A small, kind cough from the coordinator tried to help, but it only made the air feel tighter. The sound thinned. Lena tried to find the measure again, but she was now thinking about finding it, not about listening. It felt like trying to step on a moving walkway that kept sliding away. "Stop, please," said the coordinator, not unkindly. He glanced at the clock again and pressed his lips together. "I'm sorry. We can't." He did not shout or shame her. He simply had to protect a schedule. Lena took her hands off the keys and folded them in her lap. "I understand," she said. She meant it. This space had rules and needs, and she had come into it at the last minute. She stood and collected her music. "Thank you for letting me try." The concertmaster touched the edge of the piano with 2 fingers, like a little nod of respect, and said softly, "You have a beautiful touch. Don't give up." His voice was low so it would not embarrass anyone. It was gentle so it would not break anything. Lena smiled and felt her eyes become bright. She blinked and took one slow breath. "Thank you," she said, and stepped down from the stage. In the side hallway, where the air was cool and smelled faintly of paint and dust, she leaned against the wall for a moment and let 2 tears fall. They were not loud tears. They were quiet and careful, as if even they wanted to be respectful in this place. A stagehand walked by with a coil of cable over his shoulder. He saw her, paused, and pulled a small, clean tissue from his pocket. "Here," he said simply. No big speech. Just a kindness. "Thank you," Lena said again. She wiped her eyes, then folded the tissue small and put it in her pocket in case the tears came back later. She did not feel angry. She did not feel ashamed. She felt tired, and she felt the weight of not being ready yet. But she also felt a small, steady line inside her that did not break. In the lobby, families were taking their seats for the preview. She could have stayed to listen, and for a moment she almost did. But the church was calling her, not with bells, but with the plain tone of work to be done. She left the hall quietly and walked out into the late afternoon. The sky was pale and soft, like paper that had been washed and left to dry. She could still hear the strings in her head. She found the beat again and held it, like a hand. She went back to the church and put the music on the stand. She set the metronome from Mrs. Sabina to a slow click and played the part where she had rushed. She did not try to fix it by force. She fixed it by listening twice as much as she played. She hummed the string line and then answered it on the keys. She walked the notes like stepping stones, each one firm under her feet. When she reached the tricky corner, she did not jump. She breathed, then turned, then continued. It was not perfect, but it was honest, and it held. Night came, and the church grew darker around the soft puddle of light where she sat. She closed the lid, placed the metronome back in her bag, and stood. The day had not given her the seat on stage she hoped for. But it had given her something else, a clearer map of where she needed to slow down, a warmer belief that her ear could guide her, and a deep, quiet promise to herself that did not fade when the door closed. On the way home, the bus windows showed her reflection next to the city lights. She looked ordinary, and she was. But the ordinary can hold a long, steady light. Lena held that light like a small lantern and told herself, in a voice that did not need to be loud to be true, "Keep going." Lena did not stop after the failed try at the Civic Hall. She felt sad that evening, but the sadness turned into something else the next morning. It became a question inside her heart: what if I can learn a little better? What if I can find someone who knows more than me? She carried that question with her as she cleaned the office floors, as she stacked bread loaves at the bakery, and as she hummed the orchestra's melody on the bus. That same week, she met someone who would help her change direction. In the church, when the choir had gone home and she was practicing alone, an older man walked slowly down the aisle. He wore a simple sweater and carried a bucket with rags. His steps were steady, and his eyes looked like they had seen many years of both joy and challenge. His name was Mr. Duarte, the evening janitor. Lena had seen him before but never spoken to him for more than a polite greeting. He paused near the piano and listened. "You play with feeling," he said, his voice calm and low. "But you count with your hands instead of your heart. That's why you get lost." Lena looked up, surprised. "I try to count," she said. "I say the numbers, but when the music grows, I lose them." Mr. Duarte set his bucket down and tapped 4 times gently on the pew rail. 1, 2, 3, 4. "You see? Don't rush. Don't let the hands run away. You walk with the beat like walking down the street. Left, right, left, right. Simple." He explained that long ago, before he worked as a janitor, he had been a music teacher. He had guided many children who thought they could never read music. His face softened as he remembered. "It is not about reading with your eyes only," he told her. "It is about listening with your whole self." From that night, Mr. Duarte stayed a few minutes after his shift to help Lena. He would clap steady beats while she played. Sometimes he would hum the string lines so she could feel where her answer should land. He did not make her feel small for her mistakes. Instead, he nodded each time she paused to breathe. "Better," he would say. "Again. Slow is honest." Lena began to record herself more seriously. On the bus, she listened again and again, not just to the notes but to the space between them. She learned to hum the orchestra's part as if she were inside their circle, waiting for her turn. She began to see that music was not about showing off, but about listening and answering. That thought made her calmer. One afternoon, the civic hall door was half open while she passed by. She heard the faint sound of strings rehearsing and could not help but stop. A gentle pull drew her closer, and soon she found herself in a side corridor, standing where the sound flowed like sunlight through a window. She pressed her ear closer and hummed softly, following the melody as if it were guiding her steps. The maestro himself entered from another side door at that moment. His eyes fell on her, and she froze. She remembered his earlier words about random noise and wanted to step back. But Mr. Duarte's voice in her memory said, "Don't run away. Slow is honest." The maestro did not speak right away. He listened. He heard her hum softly in tune with the orchestra and noticed how her head moved with the beat. "You know this passage?" he asked. "I try," Lena said quietly. "I have practiced it." Slowly. The maestro walked closer to the side piano. He placed a score on it and tapped a short phrase. "Play this middle section," he said, not unkindly, but with a curious tone. Her fingers trembled at first, but she remembered the clapping beat of Mr. Duarte. She played each note slowly, giving space for the line to breathe. The sound was not grand, but it carried care. The maestro raised his eyebrows. It was not polished, but it was not careless either. It had honesty. He waited for her to stop and said, "You listen. That is rare." His voice was softer than before. "Come tomorrow at 6. We will see." Lena left the hall with her heart thumping like a drum, but not from fear. She felt a small door open in front of her. She walked home with her steps lighter than usual, the words echoing in her mind, "Come tomorrow at 6. That night, she told Mrs. Sabina and Mr. Duarte. Both smiled warmly. "You are ready for this step," said Mrs. Sabina. "Not because you are perfect, but because you are honest with your sound." Mr. Duarte nodded and added, "Remember, don't chase the orchestra. Invite them to walk with you." Lena stayed up later than usual, practicing gently with the metronome, then closing her eyes to hum the entire piece. She imagined the strings, the woodwinds, the bows moving like waves, and her hands answering calmly. She promised herself she would not try to be brilliant. She would try to be true. The next day, she carried herself with a quiet strength. At work, her co-workers noticed she smiled more often. Even Rosa at the bakery said, "You look like you're carrying a secret." Lena only smiled and said, "Maybe I am." When evening came, she washed her hands carefully, put on her clean sweater, and tied her hair neatly. She carried the marked score in her bag. As she walked toward the civic hall, the street lights flickered on one by one, like they too were preparing for the night ahead. She felt nervous, yes, but inside that nervousness was also a steady calm, like a river that knows where it flows. She thought of her father, tapping rhythms on the table. She thought of the choir director's scarf bright against the gray. She thought of Mr. Duarte's clap steady as footsteps. All of them were with her now, not on stage but in her heart. By the time she reached the hall doors, she knew she was no longer only a simple woman watching from the side. She was someone carrying a piece of music inside her, ready to let it speak. And tomorrow, the hall would hear her answer. Lena did not stop after the failed try at the civic hall. She felt sad that evening, but the sadness turned into something else the next morning. It became a question inside her heart: what if I can learn a little better? What if I can find someone who knows more than me? She carried that question with her as she cleaned the office floors, as she stacked bread loaves at the bakery, and as she hummed the orchestra's melody on the bus. That same week, she met someone who would help her change direction. In the church, when the choir had gone home and she was practicing alone, an older man walked slowly down the aisle. He wore a simple sweater and carried a bucket with rags. His steps were steady, and his eyes looked like they had seen many years of both joy and challenge. His name was Mr. Duarte, the evening janitor. Lena had seen him before but never spoken to him for more than a polite greeting. He paused near the piano and listened. "You play with feeling," he said, his voice calm and low. "But you count with your hands instead of your heart. That's why you get lost." Lena looked up, surprised. "I try to count," she said. "I say the numbers, but when the music grows, I lose them." Mr. Duarte set his bucket down and tapped 4 times gently on the pew rail. 1, 2, 3, 4. "You see? Don't rush. Don't let the hands run away. You walk with the beat like walking down the street. Left, right, left, right. Simple." He explained that long ago, before he worked as a janitor, he had been a music teacher. He had guided many children who thought they could never read music. His face softened as he remembered. "It is not about reading with your eyes only," he told her. "It is about listening with your whole self." From that night, Mr. Duarte stayed a few minutes after his shift to help Lena. He would clap steady beats while she played. Sometimes he would hum the string lines so she could feel where her answer should land. He did not make her feel small for her mistakes. Instead, he nodded each time she paused to breathe. "Better," he would say. "Again. Slow is honest." Lena began to record herself more seriously. On the bus, she listened again and again, not just to the notes but to the space between them. She learned to hum the orchestra's part as if she were inside their circle, waiting for her turn. She began to see that music was not about showing off, but about listening and answering. That thought made her calmer. One afternoon, the civic hall door was half open while she passed by. She heard the faint sound of strings rehearsing and could not help but stop. A gentle pull drew her closer, and soon she found herself in a side corridor, standing where the sound flowed like sunlight through a window. She pressed her ear closer and hummed softly, following the melody as if it were guiding her steps. The maestro himself entered from another side door at that moment. His eyes fell on her, and she froze. She remembered his earlier words about random noise and wanted to step back. But Mr. Duarte's voice in her memory said, "Don't run away. Slow is honest." The maestro did not speak right away. He listened. He heard her hum softly in tune with the orchestra and noticed how her head moved with the beat. "You know this passage?" he asked. "I try," Lena said quietly. "I have practiced it." Slowly. The maestro walked closer to the side piano. He placed a score on it and tapped a short phrase. "Play this middle section," he said, not unkindly, but with a curious tone. Her fingers trembled at first, but she remembered the clapping beat of Mr. Duarte. She played each note slowly, giving space for the line to breathe. The sound was not grand, but it carried care. The maestro raised his eyebrows. It was not polished, but it was not careless either. It had honesty. He waited for her to stop and said, "You listen." "That is rare." His voice was softer than before. "Come tomorrow at 6. We will see." Lena left the hall with her heart thumping like a drum, but not from fear. She felt a small door open in front of her. She walked home with her steps lighter than usual, the words echoing in her mind, "Come tomorrow at 6. That night, she told Mrs. Sabina and Mr. Duarte. Both smiled warmly. "You are ready for the step," said Mrs. Sabina. "Not because you are perfect, but because you are honest with your sound." Mr. Duarte nodded and added, "Remember, don't chase the orchestra. Invite them to walk with you." Lena stayed up later than usual, practicing gently with the metronome, then closing her eyes to hum the entire piece. She imagined the strings, the woodwinds, the bows moving like waves, and her hands answering calmly. She promised herself she would not try to be brilliant. She would try to be true. The next day, she carried herself with a quiet strength. At work, her co-workers noticed she smiled more often. Even Rosa at the bakery said, "You look like you're carrying a secret." Lena only smiled and said, "Maybe I am." When evening came, she washed her hands carefully, put on her clean sweater, and tied her hair neatly. She carried the marked score in her bag. As she walked toward the civic hall, the street lights flickered on one by one, like they too were preparing for the night ahead. She felt nervous, yes, but inside that nervousness was also a steady calm, like a river that knows where it flows. She thought of her father, tapping rhythms on the table. She thought of the choir director's scarf bright against the gray. She thought of Mr. Duarte's clap steady as footsteps. All of them were with her now, not on stage but in her heart. By the time she reached the hall doors, she knew she was no longer only a simple woman watching from the side. She was someone carrying a piece of music inside her, ready to let it speak. And tomorrow, the hall would hear her answer. When the ovation finally softened and the curtain came down, Lena stepped into the backstage corridor with her heart still racing. The sound of applause echoed in her chest, not as noise but as warmth. She leaned against the wall for a moment, pressing her hands together, trying to believe what had just happened. The woman who had once been told she made random noise had now been lifted to her feet by a hall full of strangers who stood to honor her. The maestro approached her again. His steps were calm, and his voice carried none of the sharpness she remembered from the first day. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, away from the crowd. "I judged you without knowing you. Tonight, you reminded me that music is not about names or degrees, it is about honesty. And your honesty touched them all." He extended his hand. Lena shook it gently, not as a student bowing to a master, but as one musician meeting another in respect. After the performance, the local paper wrote a short piece about the evening. It was not about fame or glamour. It was a simple story: community woman steps in, delivers heartfelt performance. A photo showed Lena bowing, her head low, the maestro holding her hand up high. People in town recognized her face from the bakery. The next morning, several customers smiled at her with new warmth. One said softly, "We're proud of you." Lena only blushed and tied their pastry boxes with neat ribbons. What surprised her most came a few days later. The conservatory director called the bakery and asked to speak with her. The maestro mentioned you, the director said. We offer evening classes for adults. I would like to extend a place for you, if you are interested. And we have an upright piano to donate, if you can find space for it. Her room was small, but she made space. She moved a chair, shifted a table, and cleared a corner where the piano stood tall and shining, even if a little worn at the edges. When it was delivered, she placed her hand on its smooth wood and felt as though an old friend had come home. From then on, each evening, after her long shifts, she sat at the piano with a quiet lamp and practiced with fresh purpose. But Lena did not keep her gift only for herself. She remembered the years when she had struggled alone, without a teacher, without guidance, only with her ear and her father's gentle words. She thought of children and adults in the community who might also love music but had no place to learn. So, she asked the church if she could use the hall on Saturdays for a free class. The first week, 3 children came, shy and uncertain. She showed them how to number their fingers, how to play slowly, and how to listen first. She smiled when they pressed a wrong key and said, "It is not a mistake, it is a step. Try again." Word spread quietly. Soon, more came, not just children, but also an elderly man who had always wanted to learn, and a young woman who had given up lessons years before. They all found a welcome space with Lena. On one Saturday, Mr. Duarte appeared at the door, leaning on his mop like a staff. He listened to the little ones plucking notes and clapping rhythms. His smile was wide and proud. He said, "You have become what you were looking for, the teacher." Lena laughed softly and shook her head. "I am still learning," she said. "Yes," Mr. Duarte replied, "and that is why they will follow you." The clip of her performance at the Civic Hall, posted by someone in the audience, began to travel online. Not millions of views, but enough that people from nearby towns saw it. Messages arrived: "Thank you for reminding us that music belongs to everyone. Your playing gave me courage to return to the piano. I watched it with my mother, and she cried." Lena read each message slowly, feeling the connection stretch beyond her small town. One evening, as she closed the bakery, she found the maestro had sent her a letter. It was written in a firm but elegant hand: "Technique serves the heart. Many forget this truth, chasing speed and brilliance. You reminded me in one evening what my years had hidden. Thank you. Keep listening, and the world will always listen back." She folded the letter carefully and placed it between the pages of her music folder, where it would rest as a reminder. Life did not suddenly become easy. She still woke early to clean, still stacked bread trays that made her arms ache, still counted coins to stretch her week. But something inside her had shifted. She walked taller, her eyes brighter. She knew that even in ordinary clothes, in ordinary streets, she carried something extraordinary, the courage to answer music with honesty. The townspeople noticed too. They no longer saw just the quiet woman behind the counter. They saw someone who had stood on a great stage and played with truth. Yet Lena herself never boasted. She remained the same, humble, steady, smiling softly as she tied up bread or handed a child a cookie. What changed was the way she carried her music, no longer hidden, no longer shy, but alive in her every step. In the end, the story was not about a famous maestro or a grand hall. It was about a simple woman who refused to let mockery define her, who found strength in kindness, who worked with patience until her heart could speak through sound. Her life became proof that talent can grow in hidden places, that respect has no uniform, and that sometimes the most unexpected voice can move an entire room. When Lena sat at her piano late at night, the window open to the quiet street, she often thought back to that first day when the maestro dismissed her. She no longer felt pain about it. Instead, she felt grateful, because that moment had pushed her to make a promise that led her here. And whenever her students pressed a wrong note and looked at her with worry, she smiled and told them what she had learned herself: "Do not be afraid. Music is patient. Keep listening. Keep answering. The rest will come. And so her journey continued, not toward fame, not toward riches, but toward something deeper, a life where her simple honesty became a melody that lifted others too.